My name is Dallas Eliuk, and you're listening to Pro Lacrosse Talk.
On Schreiber.
Sidearm win, scores!
Now it's one. Padel scores! Hands off for Ravel, switches hands and scores!
Carly Omo showing off those shifty skills.
Right off the bat, there's Lyle Thompson.
Trying to pick his spot and stopped by Eliuk.
That was textbook Eliuk. Eliuk sits low, gives him the high corner, and then just sweeps up with the acrobatic save.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Pro Lacrosse Talk podcast, the voice of Pro Lacrosse. I'm Hutton, he's Adam, and together we're bringing you interviews from all your favorite players and coaches, as well as news and analysis from all 4 professional lacrosse leagues. We are lucky enough to have arguably the best goalie of all time in Dallas Eliuk on the show today. In 18 seasons, Dallas was a pro 9 times, 4-time champion, and 2-time championship MVP. Retired from the game as the NL's all-time leader in saves. He's a member of the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame and an NL Hall of Famer as well. Dallas, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Thank you for having me on. I'm a long-time listener. Big fan.
No, we appreciate it. Adam has been itching to get you on for a while. Myself too, but you are one of Adam's childhood idols. So having you on has been awesome. We're really, really excited to kind of talk to you about your career. I know Adam's excited more than anyone. So with that, though, we'll kind of get started where you grew up in Vancouver. Talk to us a little bit about how you first got into the game of lacrosse and what made you first get in cage.
Well, you know, being from Canada, Vancouver, British Columbia, to be exact, my father got me into ice hockey at an early age. And when the hockey season was over, he signed me up for lacrosse. And in Canada, when you say lacrosse or mention lacrosse, that means indoor. So from the age of 6 on, I was playing ice hockey in the winter and then indoor box lacrosse in the summer.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And talking about the box game a little bit more, you played for Burnaby in juniors, and you obviously were one of the top goalies in juniors there, top goalie of the year, considered the best player when you did end up getting picked first overall in a WLA draft. It was a pretty unique situation, right? It was an expansion year, so you got to get right onto the field, get right into the cage during your WLA career. So talk about what that was like for your development.
Yeah, you know, that's a very good question. A good point to make was a lot of goaltenders in the earlier years, you know, they'll join a team and there'll be someone senior that's a starter. Mm-hmm. So they have to sit in the bench and watch games and chomp at the bit and look for their opportunity to play. And it, you know, puts a young goalie under a lot of pressure. When I joined the men's league senior A ranks, because we were an expansion team, I was a number 1 draft pick. So I was a starter. I was just thrown right into the fire, and it was a great way to join the league. You know, we had a backup goalie, but you know, I played every game and got blasted in there, outshot every game, and it taught me how to be strong, you know, and just focus on the next shot.
Yeah, and you know, you're considered one of the most athletic goalies of all time. I'm going to be honest, I was a big Wings fan and a goalie myself, so I always, whenever we would go to games, I would always ask my dad to buy tickets right behind the cage so I could see how you read and anticipated shots and like went post to post. I didn't care about most of the rest of the game going on, to be honest with you. I was just watching cage. Where did you really develop your style and the way you played?
There was a goalie that I used to go to watch. Like you said, you used to come to the Wings games and sat behind my net. Mm-hmm. I used to watch the Senior A league play when I was just a kid, and the goalie that I admired most because of his play was Dave Evans, who was the Philadelphia Wings coach for a number of years. So when Dave played goal, he threw everything he had at the shot. He would leave his feet. Anything that went into his stick was thrown up into the stands. I mean, he was very, very exciting to watch as a young boy. You know, and I watched him play against other teams and other goalies, and I couldn't tell you who played in that for any of the other teams. It was just all about watching Dave and his flamboyant style of play.
Awesome. And, you know, let's talk about you jumping to the pros yourself. You joined the MILL and joined the Wings in '91. How did you feel that the Philadelphia Wings kind of embraced you when you did come to town?
Well, when I did join the team, it was in '91, and they had just won the championship, both I guess in '89 and '90.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were looking to three-peat, I believe. And the year I joined the MILL, they made the nets wider. They made them 6 inches wider than what I grew up playing in. So it was a bit of a technical adjustment and mental adjustment for me to step into the pros and have these guys, these snipers that could rip corners on the run, pin corners, the width of the ball. So joining the wings with them coming off a championship and with them making the nets bigger, I was feeling the heat a little bit. Beforehand, I had to improve my game.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was. You don't really see that much in any sport where they make that big of a technical adjustment to, the actual physical nets. You kind of seen it in the past, but I'm sure that was a big adjustment for you.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of it, I mean, there are a lot of posts throughout the course of a game.
Sure.
And, the width, 3 inches is the width of a ball so 6 inches is a ball on each side of you. And that, not only that, but visually, the shooter sees more net, so he's more likely to take that shot.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, no, that makes complete sense. And you put up on, we'll talk a little bit more about your YouTube channel later, but you did just post that game where the Wings had to play with hockey nets for a game. At least that your cage didn't get moved to a hockey net, right?
No, that's right. I remember because Dave recruited me. I was a free agent. He signed me for Philly, and I remember my first couple of days that I was in Philadelphia, staying in an apartment with him, and he, I said, well, what about the wider nets? Is this going to be a bit of a change? He says, just play your game here. Here's a game that we played last year. And he threw in the VHS tape. There was my other idol playing goal, Dwight Metke, who was very acrobatic and very athletic, and played in a hockey net. And really, the game was close, and it was exciting. So if I figured if he could play in a hockey net, surely I can adjust my game enough to play in a 6 larger goal.
Too funny. And so we're curious about the kind of transition from MILL to NLL, right? You were there for the transition. Talk about what that was like from a player's perspective a little bit. We've heard from some of the people that ran those leagues at the time, and talk about what it was like for you as a player at that time.
Oh, the game. Remember, I'm strictly from a goaltender's perspective, so the way I see things is a lot different than what most people on the field and what they see. And I thought that the first year there wasn't really much of a difference as far as the game was concerned, because we had a lot of the same guys playing for the same teams. It was a tougher, a tighter called game. I felt, or it seemed like there were more penalties than there were in the MILL. Because initially the NLL, people think that it was a seamless transition. It really wasn't. I don't know if you know the backstory, what exactly happened, but the MILL was owned by two owners, and they ran the show. So they owned Buffalo, Philly. They owned every market, and players wanted to make a little more money.
Sure.
And they approached the owners, the two original owners, about, hey, give us a raise. We need a raise. You've been around forever. We want expansion. And they kept, throwing guys a bone. Okay, we'll do this. We'll do that.
Sure.
And they never did. They didn't want to expand at the rate that the players wanted to. So knowing full well that the two original owners wouldn't give the players a pay raise, the Players Association went to all the different markets and found ownership groups in the different markets. So when they approached the old owners, hey, listen, this is what we like. The old owners said, of course not, we can't do that for you. So they just started a brand new league right out from under the Philly owners. Now, because those two owners had Philly and the new group, the NLL, didn't have a team in Philly, they gave the old ownership group the Philly franchise, and I think they may have owned another, part of another team, but all of the licensing, all of the television, everything that they had with the old MILL went out the window. So starting from scratch, I remember playing in those MILL games, and we were getting fan letters from across North America, because of the ESPN2 broadcasts and such. So I found the game itself was a little tighter called. There wasn't as much rough stuff, but the game itself was pretty much the same the first couple of years. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Hutton's uncle actually played on the practice squad for the Baltimore Thunder, and he tells stories. You talk about rough and tumble in the MILL. He would come home, he said, and just would get it beat out of him. He would.
Yeah. He said when he first went to a practice, and they weren't making much back then when the league was first started or whatever in the early 90s, and I guess around the time when you joined, but he was saying that they taught him cross check on his arm, and then they would get to take a shot or whatever, but they just had people wailing on that practice because that's how it was though in the games, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting too. I really liked what you talked about with a lot of people think it was like a seamless transition from MILL to NLL, but as we know, there was a little bit more to that story before the NLL was able to kind of rise from the original MILL. So it's interesting to hear that perspective, at least from a player particularly.
Yeah, it obviously now it's they have a great commissioner and it's growing, but at that time they took a few steps backward. It was more of an adjustment dealing without any television and no fanfare. It was a step or two backwards at the time. But, the Players Association, they needed to protect the players. So all of these, the boarding checks, the free-for-alls that you used to see in these old games, man, guys flying into the boards head first, and it would just be a push call from behind, possession. The Players Association had to step in and say, this has to be a major penalty. You're going to kill some. We've been lucky no one has been really hurt from the way the game has been played. So we need to tighten up the penalty calls. That was a big part of it too.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. But like you said, from a gameplay standpoint, wasn't too much of an adjustment because you really took the NLL by storm. Despite, some skeptics around the league, you guys won your third title in '98. How was it like, winning that third championship for yourself? It's funny of the lot. That was probably the one that would be the sweetest because we had, in the early 90s for a bit there, we had both Paul and Gary Gate, and the majority of the rest of our team were stud American players. And then we lost Paul to Rochester. And we just had Gary, and it was Gary against Paul in our 95 championship. Tom Marichuk was as good as either of those guys and was just an amazing player as well. So when the new league formed, they put the team in Baltimore, and the ownership group there had a fair amount of money that they're throwing around, and they ended up acquiring Gary from us, Gary Gate. And, when our ownership group at the time figured, oh, no, we lost Gary, that's it, our team, we're out the door, it's just going to be a year of rebuilding. And the rest of us were, to put it lightly, a little pissed off. It was more just a one-man team. And so as it goes, we ended up playing Gary's team, the Baltimore Thunder. They were the highest scoring team in the league that season. So we played them for the championship, and it was a best of 3 series, and we beat them 2 straight. So it was a great feeling, with it being a brand new league, the NLL. And without Gary Gate, we ended up winning the championship. I think we opened a lot of eyes for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, you definitely opened my eyes. I was born in '91, so I was about 7 at the time. And Matt Oglesby and Greg Trainer actually came to my dad's school right after you guys won and brought the trophy with me. And I have a picture. I'm about as tall as the first ever NLL trophy, but I have that in my office here. So that's where my Wings fandom started.
Yeah, we were great. I mean, the thing about those early 90s teams in the MILL, we were very tight. I was an import, but the majority of the guys were local. management didn't fly anyone in. You know, we were a core group of guys from Philly, and we were successful, and that was a great thing. Great thing. And you know, so many teams now, players don't know each other, or they're all buddies and they fly in and out all the time, and you don't get that tight-knit group that we had in the mid-90s.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going off that 98 championship, another fantastic time for you in the Wings was that 2001 championship where you upset Toronto in that big victory. We got to talk to Mark Millen a few months ago about his experience and that big win as well. So talk a little bit about that win up in Toronto.
The win itself, you know, when I played, I didn't realize it, but I thrive being in the underdog position.
Yep.
So when we're faced with the arduous task of having to go into Toronto, we had never won a game there before. And looking at our previous record against them, in 99 and then in 2000, we went there in the semifinals for the playoffs, and they beat us both times quite handily. So when we ended up going up there in 2001, we had our backs against the wall. No one gave us a snowball's chance. The local papers were, you know, they were printing of this is going to be the parade route. They're going to be the first team to three-peat. And when we got into Toronto, we were looking at the newspaper clippings, and we studied their team very well. Our coach, Tony Resch, was an awesome coach. You know, I can't say enough about him. And we scouted them very well, and we had a game plan how to shoot against their goalie, and we executed exceedingly well. And guys like Mark Millen, man, he was running circles around their defenders. They were a big, tough defensive team, and in the past, they were able to bully us and push us around in the field. In this game, they didn't. We pushed back and we pushed hard. And I mean, the final score, we beat them by 1 goal, but that was no indication of the play. I mean, we controlled the entire game. They scored a goal with a second or two left in the clock.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have even had that one. I threw the ball away thinking, you know, I'd throw the ball deep into their end, but my stick hooked, and one of their guys picked off a pass and threw it to an open man on the crease. But yeah, we beat them handily, and it was a great feeling.
You're ready to crown the Rock that, you know, the third champion and a third straight championship. And you guys shut them up. And, you know, rewatching that game, I should say, because, you know, I didn't watch it when it happened, but I watched it recently because Adam had seen it, and he told me, you got to watch it. It's on Dallas's YouTube page. And it's the Toronto announcers, and they're just like, they go from like saying you have no chance to just utter disbelief in that game. It's incredible.
Yeah, don't get me started on those Toronto announcers, man. They're brutal. And I mean, I understand you need to pump up your own team and pump their tires, but they were another motivating factor. Those knuckleheads, listening to them, you know, their playoff games and how great they are, and they're the best in this department. And then, oh my God, it was really nice when the final horn went. You could hear a pin drop. You know, we had a group of fans up in the rafters, I think, at one end, and it was something else silencing their sold out Air Canada Center. That was a great feeling.
Yeah, it took the air right out of Air Canada, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And remind me, you also that was a great year for you. You also won the Mann Cup with Coquitlam that in 2001. Is that correct?
Yeah. We the funny thing is too, the star players on our Coquitlam team were 2 of the Toronto Rock star players, or 3 of them. We had 3 guys that played for the Rock. So after beating the Rock in the NL championship, they were my teammates for summer ball. In the Mann Cup, Colin Doyle, who's a Toronto Rock star, you know, he'll be in the Hall of Fame too. He ended up scoring the game-winning goal against his Toronto Rock goalie, who was in net for Brampton under a minute to go.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a great summer.
That's awesome. And then you made the move to Portland with the Lumberjacks expansion franchise. What were those 3 seasons like?
The first season was fantastic. Angela was a phenomenal owner. She treated everyone. It was a first-class organization, and we did exceedingly well. Being an expansion team at the time, I guess our schedule wasn't as difficult as some of the other teams. So we ended up winning our division, and we hosted a playoff game, but we lost in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. But then the next year, because we finished at the top of our division, we had a very difficult schedule, a lot of back-to-back games against tough teams, and we didn't do very well in the standings. Mm-hmm. But personally, as a goalie, it was a pretty good year for me. But that doesn't mean anything if you're losing. Mm-hmm. So that third season was a very difficult season for me, being the old guy, feeling older. My aches and pains weren't going away, and our coach at the time, who has great success in the NLL, no matter where he goes, he had his routine, and he liked to practice the night before a game. He'd have guys at the arena till 11 o'clock at night, and then 6 or 7 o'clock wake up call the next morning for a shoot around the day of the game, which to me, I'm in my 40s. I needed my rest. I needed my breakfast. I needed all of that stuff. So it was work. My last year with the Lumberjacks was definitely work for me.
Yeah. After all those years of success, right, it's tough to change a routine like that. We goalies have our routines, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't want to be a prima donna and you'd say, hey, I'm not doing this. But if I had been a little more firm in my position, talk to him up front, and then maybe things would have been differently. But no, the late night practices and early morning shoot arounds, it was funny. Our first year, let me backpedal a bit. Our first year, I think we won a couple games and we lost 3 or 4 in a row. And I talked to some of the younger leaders on the team. Brody Merrill was one of them. Mm-hmm. We discussed this. Hey, what is up with these late night practices, the shoot arounds? We're not going to get any better by having 2 practices right before our game. Mm-hmm. So he approached the coach. The captains talked to the coach and say, listen, let's scratch our late night shoot arounds and let's just go the morning of with the light toss-up. And sure enough, we scratched the late night shoot arounds. I think we went on a 5 or 6 game winning streak. Ended up hosting a home playoff game, and what does the coach do the night before our home playoff game? As a late night shoot around. So our guys didn't have legs, and we lost. I don't ever like blaming anyone or anything. I mean, it's a team effort. But had we stuck with our recipe of success, we would have probably emerged victorious in that playoff round.
Gotcha. Yeah, do what got you there, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you finished out a great career in Portland, and then you were obviously inducted in, like we had mentioned earlier, in the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame, the NLL Hall of Fame, and you now have 35 hanging in the rafters in Philly. So talk a little bit about kind of the culmination of your career and what those honors meant to you, especially getting your number retired with the Wings.
Well, that meant an awful lot to me, and really, I didn't want to leave Philadelphia. All the years that I was there, I loved the city, the fans. We had a great relationship. They appreciated the team, and my teammates had some really good friends on the team. And my father ended up getting ill, and he was getting on in age. He had MS, and we had a coach in 2005. He was a Canadian coach the first time they flew in, a Canadian coach to coach our team. And he was another one of these guys that liked to have late night practices the night before a game and then shoot arounds the morning of. So our team in 2005, we had a good team, great bunch of guys. They didn't like the coaching staff. And again, it felt more like a job for me in Philly. And then with my dad getting sick, a buddy of mine, Marty O'Neill, who played goal many years in the NLL and MILL, he told me, listen, hey, they're going to put a team, they're expanding. I think Colorado was one of the teams, and Portland was the other. Portland being closer to home, it's a 7-hour drive. If you don't mind highway driving, so I considered both cities. I knew Govett in Colorado, and I was leaning I almost went to Colorado, but my buddy Marty O'Neill talked me into going to the Portland Lumberjacks, and I'm glad I did. Like I said, Angela was a phenomenal owner. I loved playing for her. And so when my career was over there and having my number retired in Philadelphia, it was a nice cap to everything. It was good closure.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And I want to deviate a little bit from, your accolades and talk about today. The goalie equipment is, a little bit bigger than what it was when you were playing. What are your thoughts on today's goalie equipment and, how these goalies play in comparison to, how you played?
Well, the goalie equipment is, there was a time, I want to say the early 2000s maybe, where they brought in, they formed the goaltending committee because it was getting ridiculous. Some of the guys in the early 2000s, I won't mention names, but they had the thigh pads because most of the goalie equipment was makeshift. You had to piece together ice hockey goalie gear. Mm-hmm. Had padding